Okay, you lot, so today we'll be making a follow-up video on MACHINA, and in this one I will be discussing whether you should be summoning her or not from the pickup banner, right? So as you know, she is a new unit that just came out. I unfortunately didn't get her in my 120 summon, so I did have to go for pity on her. But yeah, I have used her quite a bit in both PvP and some PvE content, right? And I feel like I'm able to give a proper review now after playing around with various strategies involving this unit, right? So I'm gonna be covering both PvP and PvE aspects. First I'll start with PvE, and then we'll move on to a little bit more PvP focused talk, right? Now for reference, the MACHINA I have currently, I only put one skill up, and that was into skill 2. I'll go over the skill ups and what sort of like stats you should be looking for when covering both PvE and PvP, but just for reference, these are the stats that I have used with her. Essentially, honestly, she only needs speed, right? The rest of the stats are whatever you can get, because her damage, she doesn't have like any sort of healing or anything like that, any sort of tanking or anything like that. The only other stat you may want to have some of is effect accuracy if you do end up using her first skill, but in a lot of cases even that won't be the case. So as long as you have a proper speed and properly have your team speed tuned with certain units, you will be just fine, right? So yeah, for PvE this is the equipment. Again, for now I have HP, speed, HP on the stats there. For Rememento, I mostly use this one. You can get this Rememento from either the regular Rememento Pity, not from the pickup banner, because I believe you cannot summon those, but you can grab it either from here, I believe it is right here, or you can get this Rememento from the Battle Pass shop, right? In general, most supports will make good use of this artifact. Unfortunately, for supports, a lot of their signature Remementos aren't that good, so this Rememento honestly works on like 90% of all supports, and their signature Rememento usually is not even gonna be the best one for them. So yeah, this one just helps you get a little bit more mana cycling, because with her skills she is gonna be using the ultimate whenever it's up, she is gonna be using her second skill a lot whenever it's up, so you will be burning through mana quite a bit, right? And yeah, for the stat skill ups, as you can see, everything is maxed. So yeah, let's talk about PvE. So for PvE content where I did use her, right, I tried her out in some of the stamina dungeons, particularly the equipment farming ones, right, both of them. Of course, she will mostly excel in the wind one because she is fire element and she is able to break a bit better. I have tried it in Abyss Corridor. I beat the full 30 out of 30 stars, right? And I have used MACHINA in every single level. I'll give you some clips of that as well. I have used her in Lake of Abyss. I managed to beat 30 out of 30 of that as well. You may have already seen a clip of that in the previous MACHINA video. And I of course used her quite a bit in PvP. Okay, so when it comes to PvE, right? I know a lot of people have been saying she's somewhat like an upgrade to Pluto, right? Because they do have very similar third skills, right? Pluto gives attack and crit rate, whereas MACHINA gives attack and crit damage, right? But Pluto does excel at having a defense break on her second skill, whereas for MACHINA it's more of a buff, right? Also, there is a small typo in the description here, right? Because if you look at it, grants all allies increased effect accuracy for 2 turns. If the target already has the buff, grants them increased damage for 2 turns. The way it works is this little word right here has debuff. If you look at it this way, has debuff would refer to the effect accuracy, but that's actually not the case. The correct description is if the target already has a buff, grant them increased damage, right? So basically, in order to get increased damage, you don't have to have the effect accuracy buff on a unit. You just need to have any buff at all. And as long as you have any buff at all, you will be getting the damage buff. I can showcase it in any of the scenario maps real quick. Okay, so what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna give a shield to my Sion, right? He will get a shield from just attacking, and as you can see, Sion doesn't actually have the effect accuracy buff, and once I use the second skill, you'll notice that Machina and Diana only get accuracy, whereas Sion will get both accuracy and the damage up buff. So yeah, essentially you only need to have any sort of buff in order to make the damage appear, right? It doesn't actually have to be the effect accuracy buff specifically. Now, overall, for Machina, right, in terms of how I used her in PvP is, or not in PvE, I mean, mostly it was gonna be as sort of like a min-max unit, because here's the deal with Machina, right? When you start out the game, right, you will struggle a little bit with getting proper equipment, and that's where Pluto really comes in with her second, or I mean her third skill, her ultimate, right? What it does is it gives you attack buff, which increases your damage, but it also gives you some critical rate buff, which means that even if you don't have 100% critical rate, right, you're still gonna be very, very close to that maximum crit rate, which means that units, especially units that only hit once, right, like their ability only does one tick of damage, will be able to benefit a lot from it, right? It's a little bit easier when you have units like Sion, when you have units like Isania, right, which usually have multiple hits on their second skill or on their ultimate, right? And in that case, having lower crit is not the worst thing, because on average, for example, if you do 5 hits and you have 80% critical rate, on average 4 of those will crit, 1 of them won't, and having a high crit damage build in that case is still good, right? But for units like Beatrice, for example, if you have 70% critical rate, right, and if killing an enemy is a matter of winning or losing, right, Pluto is gonna have way more use than Machina, which will give higher total damage output, right? However, if you only have 70% critical rate, Beatrice has a very good chance to miss that critical hit, and then all of the extra crit damage buffs that you have will really go to waste, right? So usually for early to mid game, I would say Pluto is gonna be a little bit of a better option in terms of like general PvE content, such as hunting, such as various equipment farming dungeons and all of that, right? And Machina is gonna come in clutch in a little bit more difficult PvE content, right? So I'm talking about stuff like the Abyss Lake, right? I'm talking about stuff like the Abyss Corridor, specifically the hard mode, right? Where you need to beat a dungeon in a certain amount of levels, right? And if you don't meet it in that amount of turns, not levels, turns, I mean. If you don't beat it in that amount of turns, you simply don't get the maximum level. So overall, for like increasing the total damage output, Machina is gonna be your best pick. But if you just need to make sure that your units are consistent with their damage, Pluto is going to be a little bit of a better option, right? Also, one thing for Machina is she does require a little bit of a higher investment. Pluto is a 4-star, and as long as you max out her ultimate and preferably her second skill, she will pretty much reach her maximum potential. And because she is a 4-star unit, it will be relatively easy to max it out. For Machina, not only that I would recommend for PvE specifically, you should look into upgrading her second skill at least, right? Because 1 turn damage buff is gonna be a very small amount, whereas 2 turn 1 is gonna be a huge game changer, right? Ultimate passive, you don't really care about that if you are just purely using her for PvE, because then again, she only upgrades some extra attack bar gaining from those skills, and in PvE, honestly, the extra attack bar you get from there is not a big deal at all, right? Whereas with Pluto, you do want to upgrade the ultimate and you do want to upgrade the defense break, because those directly increase the effectiveness of that. Plus, when you are using Machinima, right, especially in content that isn't PvP related, you really have to make sure to run a cleanser together with her. And honestly, for the only cleanser that I would recommend running with her would be Chloe, right? Because Chloe is gonna be able to cleanse the stun she receives from her ultimate instantly after Machina moves, right? So the general speed tuning order will be Machina moving. Of course, before or after that, you can have certain units such as like Diana, Shuta, Inferency, all of that move. But I'm purely talking about the Machina and Chloe combo. Machina should be moving first and Chloe should be moving right after, so that she could be able to cleanse that stun. Because if you don't cleanse that stun, you are not gonna be able to use the second skill, and if you don't use the second skill, honestly, it's not gonna provide as much of a damage boost as you could get in total, right? Also, Machina, since her second skill provides the same damage buff as Diana, usually you're gonna want to use Machina and Chloe in a separate team from Diana. That's why I'm saying Abyss Corridor is gonna be like the key content where you want to use her, because you do require 2 teams in there, and if Diana is used in one of her teams, Machina has the potential to increase the damage of your second team a lot, right? So mostly I would use it for like very sort of like late end game content where you already have enough material to invest in her. You are able to run her with Chloe consistently, because if you don't run her with Chloe, honestly, you're gonna have a lot of trouble maximizing the potential. And yeah, if you run it in that team, trust me, she will do amazing damage. I used her mostly with a Sasha team, right? Sasha being my main nuker, and she was doing consistently 40 to 50k, sometimes even up to 60k damage, which pretty much did like 75% of the boss's HP in a single shot, right? So if you buff it up, trust me, the damage is absolutely massive, but you also need very high critical rate on your units, and you have to make sure that you have a team built around it, such as Chloe, such as not having a Diana, because if you do have a Diana, again, it becomes the buffs sort of overlap and you're using a little bit of use in her, right? And yeah, for skill ups, again, make sure to max out the second skill for PvE. And if you do have additional ones, the first skill is also a decent option, although this particular effect you can quite easily get from other units or even a Rememento from debuffer type units, right? Such as this one. Okay, and now let's talk a bit about PvP, right? So this one, again, I'm gonna split into more of like an early mid-game section, then I'm gonna split into like end-game sort of pushing top of the leaderboard section, and then just talk about one specific combo that you can make with Machina, right? So overall, right, for a regular meta team, which essentially is like Libertas Diana as the core unit, right? So let me just quickly remove these. Usually the core unit in any arena team is gonna be Libertas Diana, right? Then you're gonna have some sort of either a buffer or a debuffer, right? Depending on whether you can speed tune your team, whether you can give enough damage on all of your units, right? So I have done a lot of variations. I used Pluto in here, I used Theodore in here, I used Priscilla in there. Sort of like there's a few different options, right? Machina, in terms of PvP, Machina is gonna be just a direct upgrade to your Pluto, right? Because if you're using a team like this, for slot being any DPS, right? So for my example, it's gonna be Sion. If you're using it in a team like this, usually it's gonna be Libertas moving first, making sure that she is able to cut all of the attack gauges. Then your Diana follows up, Pluto uses her buffs, right? And Sion does the big damage. A direct upgrade to her is by Machina's attack gauge manipulation skills. Now, in this case, right, as long as you're not using a unit that does only a single hit, or you make sure that your DPS is able to get as close to 100% critical rate as possible, in this case, Machina is gonna be like a direct upgrade, and it's a simple reason for that, right? Usually in PvP, just the attack buff alone on such a team would be able to increase the damage enough to where your DPS should be one-shotting the enemy DPS, right? It doesn't have to wipe the whole team. As long as you wipe the units that can actually kill you, you will be able to win the battle, right? So, for example, in my case, if you are also using Sion, right? If your Sion is not able to wipe the enemy team with Machina's increased attack and Diana's increased damage, right? Honestly, skill issue. No, I'm just kidding. But yeah, at that point, your DPS should be able to wipe the whole team. So yeah, both Pluto and Machina give attack buff, right? So in terms of maximizing potential, you're already kind of there, right? On top of that, when it comes to multi-hits, whether you get critical rate or critical damage, it's also not gonna be a massive difference unless your critical rate is like 20% for whatever reason, right? Then in that case, the critical rate is obviously gonna be way more impactful than critical damage, right? But yeah, overall, as long as you have like 60-70% crit rate at least, and your main DPS is a multi-hitter such as Sion, Izania, again, like there's quite a few multi-hitter units, right? In that case, you will be able to do enough damage with just attack buff. You also get a critical damage buff. Now, she does stun herself at the end of the turn, right? However, because you're sort of trying to wipe out the enemy just from her third skill alone, you should be able to wipe it enough. Now, I'm gonna try to enter a few battles. Some of them I might get outsped, so we'll have to look into a battle which I can outspeed. Okay, in this case, I was barely able to outspeed. And in this case, I hope I switched the Mementos, right? But the cool thing about this, right, is in a lot of cases, if the enemy do have a Diana or a Priscilla, you will see that the enemy Libertas is slowly gonna creep up and may eventually outspeed you, right? In this case, unfortunately, he doesn't, so he has no chance to outspeed at all. But as you can see, because of Machina's passive and because of her ultimate, even though they're not skilled up, you are slowly getting a little bit of attack gauge, and eventually you should be able to outspeed. Unfortunately for me, I was not able to outspeed in this case because my Machina is simply not skilled up, right? But in terms of the amount of attack gauge that you do get, it's gonna be pretty much the same as Pluto, but a little bit extra, right? Let me try to find another match real quick where I am able to actually... Wait, actually I think... Did I not switch some goons? No, okay, I didn't. Let's try to find a match where I can actually like outspeed properly. Okay, so it should be okay here. The enemy moved, but unfortunately my Libertas did manage to cut in, right? So I cut the attack gauges with Libertas. I buff up with my Diana, right? And yeah, I was able to outspeed after this, right? The Sesha was simply too slow. But yeah, as you can see, whenever you use skills, whenever you use the ultimate, right, you're getting a little bit of attack gauge, which can help you cut into the enemy's team, right? And obviously, because the damage is way higher from all of those buffs, you will be able to wipe much more of the enemy team. Now, the problem with Machina in teams like this, right, and the reason why I don't think she will be a big game changer for like late to end game, right, is the simple reason that here's the deal, right? Early mid game, right, a lot of the teams are not optimized too well. The enemy speeds are sort of like all over the place, right? And it's gonna be like chaos in general for probably like a few months moving forward, right? But once you get to this more of like an end game scenario, here's the simple deal, right? Whichever leader that is gonna be faster is usually gonna be the winner, as long as their team is speed 2, right? What I mean by that is, for example, as you can see, my Libertas is 301 with her Rememento, right? At this point, if my team is able to have high enough speed and follow through with it, I will be able to wipe the team. Now, my team is not for example, my Sion is not specifically built around Machina. It is built around a little bit of a different unit. So he can sometimes cut in, right? But Machina is gonna be a very good replacement for a regular sort of like early mid game, so maybe creeping into the late game, right? But once you get to all of these like very close speed competitions, here's the deal, right? When it comes to Libertas v Libertas and Diana's being in there, if your Libertas moves first and your team is speed tuned to follow up right after, Machina will help with the attack gauge pushing a bit, right? However, if you do get cut, right, Machina will absolutely have no impact, and you will be relying on your Diana's passive in order to cut in between the enemy. As you can see, last round I was able to, not last round, but like the first battle I showcased, I was able to cut in between the enemy's DPS, which allowed me to actually win the fight, right? But yeah, as you can see, as you move your units, every time you get a turn, right, the enemy Diana is gonna be pushing all of the units, right? And in cases like these, it's really important to make sure that you have enough attack bar, first of all, to follow up on all of your units, and to make sure that when the enemies move, you are able to gain enough attack gauge yourself, right? So even in this case scenario, right, even though the enemy moved, my own Diana was able to push my Sion further and further. You have seen that just before Machina moved, right, all 4 enemy units were about to move, right? But because I do have a Diana on my team, this enabled me to make sure that my Sion is able to follow through. Now the problem with this is, right, if you're someone who is on the receiving end, for example, if you do get outsped, Diana's passive will kick in, but in a lot of cases it will simply not be enough for you to gain a turn before the enemy DPS moves, right? I'm talking about like a perfectly tuned DPS scenario. So that's where Machina sort of grieves your team, right? Because her passive only works if you take the turn, right? But if you never take the turn, her passive doesn't really kick in. And that's where Priscilla actually is still gonna be like a key unit, because honestly, with a setup like this, your DPS is like, if it's a properly built DPS, it should still be able to kill the enemy DPS just with the Diana buff alone, right? So let me quickly transfer the runes to Priscilla and I'll show you what I mean. Okay, so I transferred all of my equipment and Remementos to Priscilla, right? And yeah, I'll just quickly explain why I think Priscilla is still gonna be way more meta than Machina in these teams, right? And the reason for that is, if the enemy outspeeds me, I'm gonna try to fight the highest rank and see if he is able to outspeed. But yeah, if the enemy outspeeds you, right, and he is perfectly tuned with all of his units, he won't, basically you won't stand a chance at all, right? However, if you do have a Priscilla, there is an exponentially higher chance to cut in. The reason for that is, yes, Priscilla will remove 50% of your attack gauge whenever she ults, right? However, you do have 2 units this time instead of 1 slowly pushing the attack gauges, right? So every time the enemy moves, your Diana is gonna be increasing your attack gauge of your whole team by 12%. Your Priscilla is gonna do 1 increase, right? It only works once per her turn, but it will increase by 25%. So in total, you are looking at, for example, let's say in a scenario like this, right? Diana, Priscilla, buffer, some sort, and Diana Libertas, then some sort of like a support / buffer, and then a DPS, right? The DPS will usually be moving 4th, which means that you do get 3 buffs just from various like support units. And in these cases, right, you can imagine that Priscilla buffing 25%, Diana getting 3 procs of her passive, which is a total of 36%. That's a total of 61% attack gauge that you get. Of course, that gets cut in half by Libertas passive, but you can imagine that with Priscilla alone, you are essentially getting around 30% attack gauge, and everything that Libertas removed, more than half of that you can get with just passives, right? If I didn't have Libertas there, in this case I can see that the Beatrice is super slow, so she still wouldn't be able to outspeed, but if she was much higher speed, Libertas would be the key unit in making sure that I am able to cut in, right? And yeah, if I didn't have Libertas, you can run a Machina in there, but you will notice that in a lot of cases, you will have a much harder time in trying to cut in. And the reason why I'm saying is it is very important to have good like speed tuning, right? Because in a perfectly speed tuned team, right, if you move first with your Libertas and the rest of your team is able to follow through, you will win the fight. But if your DPS is just a little bit too slow for the rest of the team, units like Priscilla are gonna be much more impactful, because at that point you're really just hoping that you are able to somehow cut in. And in a lot of cases, trust me, whenever I started using Priscilla, I have noticed that you are able to cut in a lot more, right? Because not everyone will have their DPS set at like 250 speed to a point where you are not able to cut in. Because keep in mind, like, you're reducing the attack gauges by 50%, but you're reducing the attack gauges of units that have like 300 speed. And if that 300 speed unit gets 30% of his attack gauges back, it still in a lot of cases is gonna be outspeeding the enemy DPS unit, right? So yeah, in that term, Machina is gonna be a good damage buffer, right? But she isn't gonna be a unit that helps you clutch up some wins in these like high level PvP scenarios, right? So that's why I'm saying Machina is sort of like a good early to mid game unit, right? But when it comes to late game, you either have to have like the perfect runes, like absolutely perfect runes, or you have to have extremely good speed tuning for her to work, right? Otherwise, you are gonna be in a lot of cases losing to an enemy that, for example, may have a Priscilla in there. As you can see, again, like, I managed to cut in with Priscilla, right? That single move from Diana procced both Priscilla's and Diana's passives, and my Sion was barely able to cut in between the Libertas, right? So yeah, you have to sort of weigh in which scenario you're more able to go with, right? Like, if you feel like your equipment is like top tier, if you have multiple like 250 plus sets, if you're able to get your DPS on like 250 and you are confident that you can outspeed everyone, right, Machina is gonna be amazing. But if you feel like in order to compete at the level you want, you are not able to outspeed the enemy, you will need to clutch up some wins, right? And the way to clutch up some wins will be with the Priscilla. So yeah, again, Machina, if you are confident that you are able to outspeed every time and you are able to sort of like boost enough attack gauges, in that case you will want your Machina to also have maxed out ultimate and passive skills for the extra attack gauge. But if you feel like you're not confident and you don't want to invest too much, Priscilla is going to be a very good option in terms of making sure that you can clutch up some PvP wins, right? And now just a quick note about one of the PvP teams that I've seen floating around, right? And if we quickly, you know what, let's not edit my setup, let's edit this. I've seen some ideas floating around the new possible fastest setup, because up until today, right, Libertas with her 8 speed artifact was the fastest way to win in arena. Now, with the release of Machina, there is a little bit of a different combo that you can look into, and that is Machina and Ferency. And the reason why that is a decent combo now is if we look at their Remementos, right? So first of all, let's look at the skills, right? So for those who are curious, Ferency has the same base speed as Libertas. As you can see, 139 once everything is skilled up, and Libertas as well, 139. Now the problem with that is for Libertas, the fastest Rememento that she can get on her type is this one, right? It will give her a flat 8 speed. This is currently what I'm using as well, and yeah, this is the highest amount of speed that you can get. For supports, however, they do have a much higher speed option, and that is the Ferencie's signature artifact or Rememento, right? Speed increases by 5%, which in turn makes Ferencie the fastest possible unit in the game. And with the release of Machina, right, you are able to make sort of a combo where here's the deal. with Ferency, you will usually need to use her third skill in order to have enough mana for the rest of your team to follow up, right? But just from that alone, she gets 8% attack gauge from here, and Machina also has 8% attack gauge from her passive if any ally moves. That means with a Ferency third skill, you are able to get a total of 16% attack gauge, whereas Diana's passive will only give 12% attack gauge to the enemy Libertas, which means by using the Ferency's third skill, you are still able to move with a next unit on your team and not instantly get cut with Libertas, which was the problem before, right? And after that, you are able to use units that can boost the attack gauges further, such as the ultimate skill of Machina, which again, by using the skill, you are pushing the attack gauges by 25%. The enemy Diana is only getting 12%, and you are able to snowball the rest of your units and speed up the rest of your team, right? In that case, you do have the potential to outspeed Libertas by not actually using Libertas. The problem with that is, in order to make sure that you do cut the passives on the enemy Diana, you will still need a Libertas of your own. So you are looking at a starter team of something like this, and for the fourth unit, you will want to put either like a damage dealer, another support if you use Libertas as a dealer, right? But you're gonna have to play around with this. Personally, I cannot play around with this too much because both my Machinas and my Ferency's passives are not maxed, so I will actually not be able to outspeed. But yeah, this is a team that you can play around with. I'm still not sure who would be a good fourth spot in here, but a team like this is a very high investment team, right? It will require multiple dupes on multiple units. It will require a high level Rememento on Ferency. So yeah, it's a very, very expensive team, but there is potential to be faster than Libertas in the current meta, right? But you'll have to experiment with this. I'm just sort of dropping like an idea that I've seen on one of the discords, right? And yeah, so yeah, overall, Machina, this video is probably way too long, but yeah, overall, Machina, really good unit if you are pushing for high level PvE content, specifically content like the Abyss Corridor, the Lake of the Abyss, right? The sort of like very end game sort of content. She will be a good replacement for Pluto in most cases. However, if you are early game and you really thinking about summoning Machina, honestly, if you still don't have the resources, there's a lot more important units that you have to summon, right? Especially if you're just starting out. So if you don't have key units like Libertas, like Diana, all of these, right? I would recommend saving up a bit and making sure that you are able to get those at first, and Machina you can get at any time, because honestly, if you just want to use her for regular PvE content just to boost up some damage, first of all, Pluto will work just fine, and second of all, you can get her later at any time. She doesn't need any skill ups if you just want a good attack damage booster, right? And for endgame PvE, I mean, honestly, this unit will make your life much easier. Yes, you can still complete PvE content without her, right? But honestly, it's gonna be much easier if you do end up summoning her, though you do have to have a Chloe if you really want to maximize her potential, right? And for PvP, I just talked about it. Basically, she is a good unit if you are 100% confident that you can outspeed the enemy team. But if you do have any doubts about whether you may get cut in, right, Priscilla in a lot of cases will be a more meta unit for your PvP team, right? So yeah, that's about it. That's my short but not very so short review of Machina. Hope you enjoyed, and yeah, peace.